arrow. So if you see,
admit everybody. Great, you can start.
We welcome you to the E-Symposium organized by National Scientific Committee of Intangible Cultural Heritage, ICMOS India. Historic towns, large and small, along with their natural and built environments, are documents that embody the values of traditional urban cultures, providing distinct identity. While traditional skills create the built fabric, historic towns provide space to intangible aspects in form of crafts, practices, rituals, and local festivals. There are a lot of discussions about the interrelationships of tangible and intangible within these historic towns, but on ground, their holistic management is indeed a challenge. One of the reasons is also the lack of understanding of the complexity and pervasiveness of intangible values and of their relationship with the built fabric. The E-Symposium has been conceptualized to discuss historic towns to answer some key questions. 1. How do symbiotic association and multiplicity of values work on ground in context to the interrelationships of intangible to the tangible in historic towns? 2. How to augment the role of ICH for sustainable heritage management of historic towns. South Asia consists of various regions with overlapping histories and culture, with heritage rooted in their landscapes through rituals and traditions. This E-Symposium intends to look into intriguing questions by bringing together experts and emerging professionals from South Asia, aiming to identify good practices in the management of historic towns and the issues of commodification of ICH in terms of tourism and its role in the economy of these towns. Thank you. We look forward to your participation.
Eminent speakers, participants who have joined us today. Myself, Aditi Rai, an architect, urban planner, and EPWG North Zone representative from ICMOS India, take this opportunity of welcoming you all to the third thematic session of e-Symposium on Intangible Cultural Heritage for Sustainable Management of Historic Towns in Southeast. The symposium is organized by National Scientific Committee on Intangible Cultural Heritage and Emerging Professionals Working Group of ICMOS India, along with the Center for Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University, and Department of Architecture, IIT BHU, Varanasi as knowledge partners. This e-symposium intends to serve as a platform for sharing and exchange of ideas that supports insights development on the interrelationships between tangible and intangible elements, especially in the context of historic towns and the approaches for good practices in South Asia. Spaced out in 5 thematic sessions, this symposium intends to bring together experts and emerging professionals from South Asia. Today's session focuses on the theme, Intangible Cultural Heritage as a Driver for Tourism in Historic Towns. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce our eminent speakers, Dr. Sharif Shamsimon, as President of ICMOS Bangladesh, Assistant Professor, Institute for Tourism Studies, Macau, and consultants for UNESCO, UNESCAP, and Governments of World Heritage Nomination and Management, Dr. Pushpalata Garg, former professor and head of the Department of Architecture and Planning, IIT Roorkee, Professor Sajjad Kausar, architect and conservator and a member of ICMOS Pakistan, Dr. Monalisa Maharjan, team member UNESCO chair in ICH and Traditional Know-how Portugal, network co-coordinator for ICH chapter and member of ICMOS Nepal and expert member of ICICH International Scientific Committee of ICMOS. Architect Ishita Shah, independent designer and historian at Curating for Culture and the curator member for ICMOS India. Dear speakers and participants, thank you again for being a part of this webinar. Now, I would like to introduce Secretary ICMOS Executive Committee Architect Shalini Dasgupta. Shalini ji is a conservation architect based in New Delhi and runs a multidisciplinary practice offering services in architecture, interior design, and conservation for past 26 years. Besides consultancy, she is actively involved in imparting lectures on conservation and creating awareness both at formal and informal levels. She is a visiting faculty at the Conservation Department of SPN New Delhi and Department of Fashion Communication NIFT New Delhi and Interior Architecture Department of Sushant School of Architecture in Gurgaon. An active ICMOS India member since 2013, she currently sits as a Secretary Executive Committee of ICMOS India since 2019. Shalini ji is an expert member of the International Scientific Committee of Heritage Documentation, SIPA, and the National Focal Point for the Climate Change and Heritage Working Group of ICMOS. She is currently undergoing her doctoral research in the field of heritage and climate change with an emphasis on thermal comfort in heritage buildings, especially for warm, humid climate of West Bengal. I would request Shalini ji to formally welcome the speakers and the participants.
Thank you very much, Aditi. Thank you. I would, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start by thanking Niyati, Mrinalini, EPWG, ICMOS, and the entire team which has put together this ICH e-symposium. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak on behalf of ICMOS India Executive Committee. I welcome all the experts who've been invited from India and outside. And the whole webinar has been actually formulated in a very interesting manner. The last 2 sessions and the third session now, we are getting a wonderful response of professionals and experts from not only India but all our neighboring countries. So, and there's so much of wonderful cross-cultural exchange of knowledge which is happening, which is really very heartening achievement for ICMOS India. The third session, ICH as a driver for tourism in historic towns, is a very important session. It's a very important aspect that ICH and NSC has taken on. Having worked on a number of historic towns myself in the past, number of years that one has been practicing, historic towns like Patiala, Mathura, Vrindavan, the entire Braj region, all these, currently, I've been working a lot in the Braj region, and as you all know, it's a region where the traditional socio-cultural knowledge, the skills, the practices, these are actually extremely important. And these intangible assets actually shape the tangible assets. And every nook and corner of Braj or every nook and corner of Mathura, Vrindavan has a, intangible, it has an it talks of, there are so many stories, there are so many intangible assets which are associated to, so intangible cultural heritage is a very, very important part of any historic town. And the relationship of the intangible cultural heritage to tourism, of course, the intangible, it becomes apparent actually thanks to the intercultural exchanges which are made possible through tourism. And this helps in bringing about new social and cultural combinations also. So tourism, of course, becomes an opportunity for meeting and sharing that leads the cultures involved to get to know each other better and make themselves known better. Of course, tourism also brings huge challenges, which are something which need to be addressed by professionals like us who are working in this field. So this session actually, and of course the multi-session symposium which has been planned by the NSC will surely serve as a great compendium of case studies and good practices which are drawn not only from India but from all the neighboring nations where we share so many cross-cultural linkages. So I think this whole symposium will kind of help, not only help in building awareness, knowledge, networking, but this whole assimilation of global good practices is something which will bring a lot of depth to the scientific work which is happening in ICMOS India now. So I'm extremely happy that this symposium of this nature has been organized, and just a couple of small suggestions which I can make to the organizers and the NSC is that maybe as an outcome of this webinar series, the NSC could work towards developing a cultural map and of the Indian subcontinent, or maybe the region around all the countries which are, all the South Asian countries which are participating, with an emphasis on safeguarding the intangible cultural heritage. The other aspect, since I'm also working as a focal point for climate change, ICMOS International is also asserting on a theme this year to look at climate change as an aspect by almost every NSC or every working group, which is the impact of climate change can be seen in almost every sphere. So there is an opportunity where the climate change working group has attached itself with doing a community activity called with the Geo Earth Observation Group, which they have named themselves as Urban Heritage Climate Observatory. Their main overarching objective is to help World Heritage cities to protect their heritage using Earth observation tools to address climate change impacts. And the good part about this is that we have two World Heritage cities, nominated World Heritage cities in India. So we have Jaipur and Ahmedabad, and the group is quite keen on looking at Ahmedabad as a case study to work on this. So maybe, the ICH, NSC and CCH working group can come together to work on something like this. So that's the other suggestion I have. Thank you very much for inviting me, and all the best to everyone for a wonderful session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Shalini ji, for briefing the critical role of intangible cultural heritage in today's context, and also proposing potential collaborations that can be established with other thematic areas in heritage conservation. So now we come to the most awaited part of the event, the presentations by our speakers. The moderator for today's session is architect Niyati Jigyasu. Niyati ji is currently a visiting scholar at the American University of Rome. She is an academician with more than 20 years of teaching experience at various institutions. She has also been a resource person for the UNESCO Sub-Regional Inception Workshop linking World Heritage Sites and Local Cultural Assets in 2018. And she has been a part of the course on people-centered approach at ICROM, Rome. She has been awarded a research grant for INTAC in 2019 for documentation and is currently completing her PhD that looks at the role of intangible components in conservation of historic urban areas. She is also the coordinator for NSC HTV and in ICOMOS India. And now I would like to hand over the platform to architect Niyati Jigyasu and begin with our session. Thank you. Niyati ma'am, you are on.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Aditi, and thank you, Shalini, for starting off this session. And we are also very grateful to ICOMOS India for the support for this long event, which has spanned over 2 months, literally. So good afternoon, everyone, and I thank you on behalf of my team for being here with us and for also being here with us for all the other sessions and giving us so much support with your participation, questions, comments, feedback, which has been very important and critical in taking this dialogue into a much more rich level. We had 2 sessions so far. So first was session 1, where we actually basically started with looking at the associations, the intersections, contestations between the tangible and the intangible. And it basically the takeaway was that of looking at the tangible through the intangible. So looking at the container through the contained, and that was what basically we came across as a takeaway from that session. The second session looked at the tools and the strategies for looking at the holistic approaches. So we had people from intergovernment, international organizations, local organizations, independent architects who actually looked at all these different strategies and for a holistic approach to heritage conservation and management. After coming to that, we are now coming down to tourism, because tourism is actually a very important and significant part where ICH plays a very important role. Whether we look at just a small token that people artifact that people take away with them as part of memories, or it can be also the entire experience of being in a place. So in all this thing, it finally comes down to, it gives a very overarching, experience to the person. Historic towns are major tourist attraction, and when we talk about travel site, one of the travel sites talks about 50% correspondents who actually said that history and culture were strong influence for their selection of a holiday destination. And so many of these sites are now actively developing their cultural assets in this increasingly competitive tourism marketplace, where the local distinctiveness becomes a very strong point in this overall globalization that we are facing now. UNESCO advocates ICH tourism for its dual benefits. On one hand, it talks about the economic benefits of it. On the other, we look at the sustainable development. As such, ICH has the ability to augment employment benefits for the local community tourism. It is supposed to be very indispensable, especially for developing countries, through sustainable tourism, because it can actually, support the intangible cultural practitioners, and it also supports the continuity of these practices. While some form of tourism can be sustainable, others may not be, because many examples actually across show that over-commodification of cultural heritage can also damage the very resource that on which this tourism is actually dependent. On a larger perspective, sustainable tourism should therefore integrate environmental, social, economic, cultural issues into its global operations. This subject has become much more multifaceted because with the interconnected theories and approaches where we look at ethics, accountability, social change, green tourism, public policy, and stakeholder management. So it has got many things that we are actually looking at, and trying to work with all these background. Basically, the aim of this webinar was to identify ways for harnessing the power of tourism to achieve sustainable development goals, in which ICH plays a pivotal role in context of historic towns. So without saying much, I think I'll go over to my speakers, and we have all our speakers are experts in the field with so many years of work behind them. So we have put up there even there's a short biodata on the Facebook also. So I'll be just going through very brief this thing about them, but anybody can Google, and I think they'll find so much of their work already there on the internet. So I'll start with the keynote talk by Dr. Sharif Shamsimon. And before I start, I should also take this opportunity to thank him also, because it was him and Dr. Neil Chapakain who were the first people whom I approached for this webinar, and their support was the one which started off this entire journey. So thank you so much for starting us off with that. So Dr. Ramon specializes in heritage management and heritage tourism, spanning 25 years, including consultancy for international organizations, UN bodies, and governments in 16 countries. His work focuses on the management of world heritage and historic cities, heritage impact assessment, sustainable tourism at historic cities, and heritage interpretation. So his talk basically looks into that tourism is a global multi-sector service industry with heavy emphasis on economic benefits, while ICH touches on all the three dimensions of sustainability. The presentations will dwell into discussing possible pathways to reconcile these differences and finding common ground for synergy between heritage and tourism. Over to you, Dr. Ramon.
Thank you, Professor Niyati. It's just a big topic, but before I start, I would like to thank you and of course the organizers, everyone behind, to giving me the opportunity to talk to you. So as I said, this is a huge topic and it touches complicated issues, and I know I have to present all of this in 15 minutes. So I will not say I can present everything, but I'll try to make it as simple as possible, also considering the global audience that we have today. So I changed the heading a little bit because the theme is ICH as a driver for tourism in historic cities or historic towns. But actually, as Professor Niti already just said, that culture is a big attraction for tourism. And this is why many people travel these days to have a different cultural experience. So there's no doubt that ICH being a dominant part of that cultural tourism experience is a driver for tourism in historic towns. But the question is, where can it go? What is the destination? And again, this is a question that we have been discussing for many years. Many of the discussions have been on the impacts, positive and negative impacts of tourism on other things. But now we have sustainable development goals, which collectively is trying to connect all the various dimensions that we have for human development and having a common goal for all of us. So I'll talk about three keywords that we can get from the title. One is of course, the intangible cultural heritage, and then tourism and historic towns. Now, for historic towns, we from the operation guidelines, we can see that it defines a certain way that one is which is no longer inhabited. The other type includes the places that are still inhabited. And then, of course, the new towns. But because we are talking about ICH, and that means we're talking about people and their expressions, we are actually talking about places that are still inhabited. But this is very much a physical description of historic places. The other one, the historic urban landscape concept gives a broader explanation of what we are actually dealing with. And here it goes beyond just the building, just talking about, not just talking about one layer of a place, but talking about multiple layers that makes a place special. And it's talking about broader urban context. Now, in terms of explaining the broader urban context, also highlights these. And if you look at that, you can actually see that built environment, open spaces, land use patterns, so economic processes, social culture, practice and values, intangible cultural heritage, diversity and identity are actually all interconnected and connected to ICH directly. It doesn't mean that the other dimensions are not so important. They're all connected. So when you're talking about ICH, and there's a session before when we talked about tangible and intangible, the connection between them. We also know about the nature's role in it. So in a way, when you're talking about intangible cultural heritage, when we're talking about historic towns, we are not talking about separate things, but an issue that connects multiple elements. Now, if you look at the some of the historic cities on the World Heritage List and look at the criterion, yes, number 4 is obviously because they are historic cities, although Ahmedabad doesn't have criteria 4, but number 6, which actually deals with the intangible dimension of a place, are very much common in most historic cities. So that's a recognition that historic cities and ICH are very much interconnected. Now, when you talk about ICH and whether it's in Bangladesh, someone is making a musical instrument, or it's in Nepal, somebody is, people are, producing and selling everyday items, or someone in India making an idol, which is mainly for spiritual purposes. They all have one common thing among them. One is they're all based in historic areas. In old towns, the old centers of these cities, or sometimes a very big city, which has a very modern component, but within it, which is this old part. And the other one is that these are not for tourists. These are all for everyday use of the people living in those areas, or in these city, the greater city. So this is something that we need to understand, that what we are promoting are essentially part of promoting for tourism, or thinking of promoting for tourism, are very much part of the everyday life of people. This is a justice maker in Penang. This gentleman just passed away very recently. He doesn't do it for tourists. His products are used in temples. Or this shoemaker, handmade shoemaker in Malacca, also in Malaysia. Again, yes, tourists come here to see it, but it's actually the customers are older generation ladies who use this. And then this is from Udaipur, and somebody, creating these notebooks, binders, leather products. And again, maybe tourists buy them, but this didn't start for tourists. But then these are also places where we have celebrations, not just everyday thing that we need for commercial or spiritual reasons, but there are other activities. These are, as Professor Niyata just said, containers of this kind of many ICH activities. So these cultural spaces, this one is in Kathmandu Valley, which in the World Heritage Site zone, and you have this kind of festivals celebrated by the locals. And this is from Macau, a festival which attracts a lot of tourists, but it's very much a local event. But then, among all the ICH elements, and if you use again the 5 domains from the ICH convention, these are the most spectacular elements or expressions of ICH, and which immediately attracts visitors' attentions because of the dynamic presentation of this, and then in the scale and the geographic context, the area that they cover. But again, when this happens, these kind of things, we use these spaces, the cultural spaces. And you see that this is a temple, and I just showed you the festival's picture. And if you look at it, it's just a very ordinary place every day, nothing special about it apart from this temple, which is part of the Macau's Historic Center World Heritage Site. But the same place transforms during the festival days and becomes a container or a place that supports this kind of activity to take place. Again, we don't see any tourists here because there's this component, where tourists get naturally attracted, the dance part, the music part, and then there's this community component where only the community, people who feel attached to it, feel connected to it, take part. But then out of these things, there are many other expressions of our culture that may not be on the ICH list, national list or local list or global list, but then these are very much part of the local culture and custom and practices. So the one on the left from India, the middle one is from Penang, and the right one is from Bangladesh. They have one thing in common. Again, it's very much everyday part of people's life living there. So, I can show you a lot of pictures like that, but then the other part, which you don't see normally unless we are directly connected with this kind of rituals and practices or beliefs, often happen in private spaces, temples or at houses, or especially built in community places. So not all actually are suitable for tourist consumption. This is again a part of a festival also from Macau. It's called Hungry Ghost Festival. And it has nothing to do with the Historic Center World Heritage Site. It's far from it. But on the street side, you can see people's cultural expressions. So all these things, this interconnectedness, this is presented wonderfully in the, if you go to the Intangible Cultural Heritage website of UNESCO, and the link is provided here down there. It shows, you can click and see, and all these lines show how much, or how complicated connections we have on all the dimensions of our cultural and natural and the physical environment. So in a way, touching ICH is touching everything about us. And when we introduce tourism into it, that means we also make tourism touching everything about us. And so how we can, then deal with it. I use my picture, and they laughed at this picture, say, oh, how come you use, not how come you use your own picture. But it shows, what tourists do. It's not that, we need to have authentic experience. We want to have good experience. Most of the tourists are like that. They want to be away from their everyday life. They want to experience something different. And that different can come in very many different forms and sizes and expressions. And again, by the way, this picture was taken at Malacca, which is part of Georgetown Malacca World Heritage Site in Malaysia. Now, if you look at the definition of tourism, there are many definitions. This is a kind of widely accepted, and it's quite a long one. Is that says that it's an interaction or relationship among tourists, tourism suppliers, host governments, host communities, and surrounding environments, and that are involved in attracting, transporting, hosting, and management of tourists and visitors. Now you see that host communities is one of the elements there. But when you look at the actions, attracting, transporting, hosting, and management, actually they don't have any role in it. So when culture and tourism, meet each other, we know that this is can do a lot of things, good things and bad things, but it's nothing new. I mean, it's a picture of Angkor. The left one is the 1920s, when we had, it was very kind of difficult to access place. And the one in 2008 taken by me, and we can see the ICH is still being used, even it's just a very much a temple site, which has connection with ICH, of course. But the presentation to visitors, ICH was an element. And the spiritual component, about on the other hand, suffered. We can see in 1920, only the Buddhist monks, having a very, religious engagement with the place, and now it's overwhelmed by tourists coming from all over the world. Now, when cultural resources are used for tourism, it cannot be used as it is, because most of these cultural expressions or resources are not suitable for tourist consumption. So often they are packaged with other attractions to increase their attractiveness. They're modified so that the tourism needs are met. And sometimes, new things are invented and often, packaged with the cultural expressions to make it an effective tourism product. Sometimes we use culture and cultural expressions and ICH often. So this Dragon Boat Festival was a festival for, which has a religious, spiritual meaning. But now it's just a sporting event in Macau and in Hong Kong and many places elsewhere. We also need to understand that when you talk about tourism at historic towns, we also need to look at the supply side.
We have 2 minutes. Sorry.
Oh, okay, right. So this is a statistics shows that the number of tourists increase in Macau over the years. But when they come, they need certain things, certain facilities where they stay, and the number of hotels rooms increased dramatically. Now, of course, that means new hotels. Now, Macau is only a 31 square kilometer, and when you have 40 million visitors coming and you have so many hotel rooms, you can think how this place gets transformed because of that. Now, I'm just going to show you what happens when ICH, historic town, and tourism comes together. This is a religious event in Luang Prabang, which is a World Heritage Site. This almsgiving ceremony, and you can see these pictures from 2006. A heavy involvement of local people. And this is a picture of these monks come out and then they offer alms to the monks because of their religious belief. But this is 2017, and I talked about repackaging and transforming and all these things. Now you can see that, for tourism, tourist consumption, certain changes have taken place. They are selling food, so the visitors can offer to the monks. You can see this kind of stalls, and then you can see people waiting. And previously they would sit on the ground, now sit on stools. And surprisingly, the locals are, missing from the picture. Where are they now? They have actually been sidelined. Visitors behave badly, very disrespectfully. And because tourism is not, the ICH or the heritage people or managers actually have no control over tourism on sites like historic towns, which doesn't have access control. You can have these kind of things when it's actually managed or dealt by other people. These are again, disrespectful clothing for this kind of religious events, and especially for monks. And these are the locals, sidelines at the end, away from the main roads where it used to be, which used to be places for the locals. Now they are sidelines. Just to show you that tourism changes the place, and we have to be careful. And heritage people don't have the control because they are much more powerful entities with business interest involved in it. So we need to think about this, and our traditional approach is mostly about this, how we reduce negative impacts. When it's about heritage places, we focus on protecting heritage values. But when you go beyond that, we need to think, and luckily now we have this, this concept getting popular, which is sustainable development, that how we can actually collectively contribute to sustainable development. So most of our measures are now actually reactive in nature. These things do not work because the problem has happened already. It's happening. And you have a tsunami coming already, and now we are trying to do something about it, but we should have done something earlier than that. I try to combine these things, and I know no way I can claim this is a very scientific work. I actually based this on, you can see under the tourism and cultural heritage, a few documents, and I try to show where, they mention tourism and cultural heritage can separately contribute. Of course, they claim, they can contribute to everything, but when you see black, that means the potential contribution is direct, and gray means it's indirect. And you can see that in certain cases, heritage and tourism actually can work together much more easily. Other cases, they work fine alone. So what I did, I just tried to identify where you have black icons for both common tourism and cultural heritage. And we can see in gender equality, decent work in economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, peace, justice, and strong institution and partnerships for the goals. So these are the areas where we have a lot of things in common. While individually they can contribute to other areas, probably these are the areas where we can think of working together much more closely. So how do we then measure our success? Because in sustainable development, it's not just by 2030 we finish everything. We know we had the Millennium Goals before, agenda, something I forgot, 2020 or something. So these things we had in the past, and now we're constantly having better understanding, and then we have new things coming up. But what is important is to have a long-term perspective, and impact indicators are the most effective ways of finding out how much contribution we are making to us and how good we are in our actions. So with this, I'll stop my presentation. I know I've overrun a little bit. But the main point is that there are areas where we can work together, but not everywhere. Tourism is not a panacea for all problems. It has its own limitations, but it also has its own unique areas where it can contribute much better than many other options. But then we also need to manage it. And heritage professionals, often what I see from my own work experience, are not really well equipped to deal with tourism. And this is something that we need to understand. Like tourism people, they don't really understand what heritage people really want to do, what their main goals are and concerns are. So this gap between these two groups of professionals dealing with two important elements of our life need to come together. And only then probably we can achieve something that we hope will contribute to our sustainable development. Thank you.
Dr. Imon, I agree. This is such a big topic that I don't think maybe you could have taken up the entire webinar and still we will be discussing and talking about. But thank you so much for still, going through all the different details of this. And yeah, finally, that's the main point, that management is the most important in all these systems. So we'll talk about it even later on in our discussions, but I'll now go to the next presenter, Professor Sajjad Kausar. Professor Sajjad Kausar has retired as a principal, National College of Art in 2012. He's an architect and a conservator by training. He's a co-author of award-winning books and hosted many TV series over the years. He has been awarded Associateship of National College of Arts in 1994. He also received a merit award by the American Society of Landscape in 1998. Professor Sajjad Kausar takes us on a tour to a small neighborhood close to Badshahi Mosque near the Lahore Fort in Pakistan, which was once occupied by the prominent families, including families of known classical singers. In the 1990s, with the establishment of a restaurant, a new chapter began for the neighborhood and it rose to become a food street of the historic area. This presentation attempts to explore the change that has occurred after the area was converted into a food street and its impact on the Badshahi Mosque. It argues that interventions around historical buildings cannot be carried out in an isolated fashion, but should pay sufficient attention to the social fabric and physical context into which they are based. Over to you, Professor Sajjad.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank ICOMOS India for this invitation. And I know Niyati and also Rohit for a very long time. Rohit is used to come to Lahore quite frequently. And good evening to all of you. And I'm going to, as my paper, my presentation is about Food Street Lahore, and I am sure that whenever you are going to visit Lahore, this is definitely is going to be on your agenda. But and it's a very popular spot, and some of the views that you enjoy from this street are really breathtaking. But there's another way of looking at it, the negative effects of the tourism, and that is probably what I'm going to focus today and what happened. I'm going to share now. Oh, can you listen to me? Niyati is okay?
Yes, sir. We can see it.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. It was during Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time, in the first quarter of the 19th century, that his grandson Naunihal Singh ordered clearing of all buildings within a half-mile of the walled city of Lahore. Many important historic buildings were demolished as a result of this order. A close look at the maps and the photographs produced in the 19th century also confirms that this was the case, especially in the tract of land chosen for this study. If you can see here, this is a 19th century image of Lahore Fort. The fort is here and the city is here. And so the clearing that Naunihal Singh ordered are very much there in these pictures. And so after the clearance of building in the 19th century, the area towards south side of Badshahi Mosque and the fort remain unchanged. This is where at the moment the fort, the food street is. But till let's say early 20th century, there was not much activity here. So I'm going to show you, this is how the food street appears now. This is the triangle where the food street exists now, just adjacent to a very important historical monument of Lahore. Now, these are some of the maps, and I can show you produced in 1846. I mean, this is the area under discussion at the moment, and so nothing exists here And this is another close-up. This is so these are so you can see nothing is here. And then around 1864 also nothing exists here. So this is and then 1909, and although some activities there, but still you can see the area is very much like barren. And then this is another. This is where now the food street is, where this tree exists now. And this is the latest aerial view of the place, and that's the area that is under debate or discussion today, the food street. And these houses actually are facing Badshai Mosque in this direction. So I think somewhere in 1920 the neighborhood developed, and mostly consisted of the 3-story colonial period houses on the Fort Road. This is actually the Fort Road, and that you find all those some of colonial houses over here. And so this is what is available now. This is from the colonial times, and you can see here another few buildings from colonial times. And so the neighborhood was once occupied by some very important families of Lahore, like the Chishti brothers, the architects, the famous architects who moved into this area somewhere in 1938. And then after partition, the Ustad Amanat Ali Khan and Fateh Ali Khan moved from Patiala to Lahore and choose to live here. And one of my students was from the Chishti clan, and he told me that their house was just next to Ustad Amanat Ali Khan's house, and he used to practice as you know, in India and Pakistan. He's one of the most 20th century classical singer, known classic on both sides of the border. And then he used to, do riyaz in the morning over there. And then the area that all these houses were in this triangle, and then this space in between what we called is Veda. Veda is a place where which is shared by all the residents. And Tehseen Chishti, late Tehseen Chishti, who spent his childhood here, told me that that they used to play in this area in the triangle, like cricket and local pittu garam cricket and kirikara and guli danda, all sorts of the place was actually and then it had also an intangible character, like qawwalis used to be held there and people used to sleep here. So this was quite a space, and a dyer, I was told, that who also used to live here. And according to residents living there, through this process, the space used to, he used to, after dying, he used to dry his clothes inside the Veda, into this triangle. And the residents tell us that the space used to transform into a magical, colorful environment every day. And so this was this is how the space was used in the early, after 1947. And this is the space, the enclosed space that I was talking about, the use of the space, the intangible character that as I was. And then somewhere in the 1990, a colleague of mine from National College of Arts who used to live here thought of a restaurant. And that's how Cuckoo Den was introduced. And soon it became a hit, because it was the view was breathtaking from the restaurant. So but and then what happened was that in 2003, the Wall City Authority for the first time introduced the idea of a food street in the neighborhood, particularly impacting building facing Badshahi Mosque. And so, all these building started to come up. But the worst happened was in 2007, when the government of Punjab when nearly all building facades were changed on the street facing the Badshahi Mosque. And so the character of the area changed altogether. The open space inside the buildings was lost its significance. I mean, the Veda, as so this is what now was happening. This is what happened in 2007 when they, introduced these all artificial kind of jharokas and bukharshas to the existing houses, and it was like a bazaar of, that's how it was. All these houses were marked, and then the proposals were made. And can you see on the left side there's a house, and then all these jharokas on here were introduced on this building, and so it was a very artificial kind of introduction to an area of traditional local architectural elements. And as you can see here, the original building is here, and this is the cladding done later on, just to give it an effect of wall city houses similar to wall city in Lahore. So this is what exactly happened. And although the place became, because there's not many opportunities for the locals to spend time because it was a hit in the sense that because the view was very, very fascinating. But now this is what has happened. This is all these buildings were all these buildings started to change now. And what happened was that they also changed. Earlier you could only go about 38 feet high. That means about 3-story from the British time. And then that rule was relaxed, and they were allowed to go to 72 feet. And that is where the problem started. And so, some of the buildings were demolished, and new buildings were constructed. And then in certain cases, few stories were added. So the Veda actually lost its significance once the food street was established. And now it's, as you can see here, this is the backyard of the food street. So all the food supplies are from here, and the garbage is also collected here. So so the character of the place actually changed. So this is this is where they kind of collect garbage, and but according to the Venice Charter, some of the basic restoration principles and qualities to be preserved include the historic character of a town or urban area. It specifically states that attention must be paid to the relationship between buildings and green spaces as well. The formal appearance, interior and exterior of the buildings as defined by scale, size, style, construction materials, color, and decoration. It further adds that any threat to these qualities would compromise the authenticity of the historic town or urban area. So with this intervention, the authenticity of this area was lost. Hence, planning of this nature requires a multidisciplinary study before any intervention in this area. The area should have been documented, and intervention should be supportive to the residents of this historic area. Since the development of the food street, most of the older residents have moved out. And outsiders have moved in to capitalize the price view it offers to the users of the food street. there has been no real benefit to the local residents of the area. Now Fort Street is a classical example where priority is given to local tourists over local residents, with insufficient attention to the preservation of the existing built environment. During the development of Fort Street, its impact on Badshai Mosque and the Lahore Fort was not considered at all. Due to this change, the view from the Badshai Mosque and the Lahore Fort have changed drastically. Earlier, when the buildings were 3-story high, they were not visible from the courtyard of the mosque. This new development has destroyed the immediate environment toward the south side of the mosque. Now, this is the new building that has come up. It's about 4 or 5 stories high, and so now this is what has happened. This is now what you see from the Lahore Fort, and this hideous kind of additions, and in the background Badshai Mosque. Although when you go there and you sit on the roof of these buildings, you see, or you only see Badshai Mosque, and so they really enjoy a good view from that side. But this is what you see from the fort, and also from the Hazuri Bagh inside the fort, all these structures, as you can see here, now very much visible, destroying the authenticity of the immediate environment, and this is how it is. And as I said, from the building, the view is fascinating, and I'm sure you'll also love it. But this is what has happened from the mosque. Everything is the character of the mosque, and the feel of the mosque inside the mosque has been is gone now. But on the other side, where the Samadh of Maharaja Ranjit Singh is, everything is intact and it looks okay. But as you can see here, all along the southern wall of Badshai Mosque, you see these structures, and all of these pictures was taken about 2 years ago, and they are really now up. Some of them are even higher than this level. And this is the kind of connection that is made between Badshai Mosque and the Fort Street. Now I'm going to share a music presentation with you, and then wind up after this presentation.
तुम हो गरे बनवाज दादा करम करो दाता हम वर करमा करम करो दाता हम वर सब दुखियों के तुम हो दाता राखो सब लाज दाता पूरी करो तुम सबकी आशा करम करो दाता हम वर करम करो दाता करम करो नि रे गम सरे नि दा नि रे करम मम पद नि बरे दा नि गम रे दा करम करो म बरे नि दा नि रे नि रे दा नि दा नि म बरे नि दा रे नि ब म प ग गम रे नि रे सा करम करो करम करम करो दाता करम करो दाता करम करो दाता हम पर तुम गरीब नवाज दाता करम करो करम करो करम 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 करो दाता करम करम करो दाता दाता करम दाता 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 हम पर करम करो दाता.
Well, all I'm asking Data Sahab to intervene and do something about the food street. So when designing open spaces and adjacent areas in such a close proximity to historical buildings, as in the case of Food Street, which has been developed close to the fort and Badshahi Mosque, priority should have been given to these historical monuments so that the authenticity of the immediate environment would not be sacrificed. Now, tourism is a recognized industry all over the world, and this presentation is not aiming to make a case against tourism. However, if the intervention were carefully handled and the height remained 3-story or 38 feet, the result could have been different. If the context around the historical area is changed drastically, the experience is bound to change. In this case, interventions have destroyed the very feel of the two most important monuments of Lahore. As it is rightly said, that the objective of tourism should be to support conservation needs, not conservation to meet tourism needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Kausar, and that was very interesting, especially with the inclusion of the music. I think was a great experience for all of us also. So I'll quickly go to the next speaker. That's Dr. Pushpalata. Pushpalata is former professor and head of Department of Architecture and Planning and member of the Board of Governors of Indian Institute of Technology, Turkey. She is author and editor of many international journals and has published around 120 papers and has 4 decades of teaching and research experience. With specific context of small towns, the paper explores the issues of ICH and tourism promotion in context of Almora, a small hill town in Uttarakhand that was the capital of the Kumaon region for 3 centuries, which in spite of being considered the cultural capital of Kumaon and unique vernacular architecture is not a very popular tourist destination. I think we are always talking about, how these small towns should be more made into a tourist destination, also so that, the load of the bigger places can be shared by these, but they also have their own problems also. So over to Dr. Pushpalata. It would be interesting to look at your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to share my experience and whatever little I have heard from here. So in keeping with the theme of the session, I will be talking about the intangible cultural heritage as the driver for sustainability through tourism, and in context of a small town like what Niyati mentioned just now. Again, when we start looking at it, I'll be taking more from a context of speaking from trying to understand what the issues are and how they are different, seeing the context of the particular town, and what its context and how that context makes it the issues and the problems different, and finally what could be a probable approach. So starting from the fundamentals of the basics of like intangible cultural heritage and tourism and natural environment. I am here focusing on natural environment and the sustainability of it, not the sustainable management, because understanding the relationship between the three is very important for it, because otherwise intangible cultural heritage and natural environment as it is have a very mutually nurturing or a symbiotic relationship to start with. But instead of trying to do it straight, what we are trying to do is really achieve that sustainability through tourism. So what we need to see is how each one of them relates to one another. And so those aspects, like in ICH and tourism, what we have to see is it is which aspects of ICH can act as a driver for tourism. Not all aspects maybe are so-called marketable or attractive to tourists. And like what makes the success of certain historic towns with ICH as popular and whereas others not as a popular tourist destination. And the next is the relationship between conservation and tourism, and then the mutual effect of tourism on environment and environment on tourism, and likewise ICH on natural environment. Now, when we look at ICH and natural environment, as I said, culture and nature have always had the symbiotic relationship in most of the cultures, where the mutual nurturing happens because nature is considered divine or sacred, and all these elements like mountains, rivers, etc., lakes, forests are worshipped. And by doing that, those are protected and they are not polluted, or no other activities take place. One example is the sacred groves. When we look at it, whether it is the sacred groves of Kerala, where Thayam, the ritual of it is basically to protect it, but how it has transformed over a period of time, that we'll talk. And then the sacred, see, we have sacred groves from all over India, whether from north in Vrindavan, where we have the sacred groves of Lord Krishna, and the kunds, which are more like for water harvesting, and sacred groves in the east to Shillong, where we have the monoliths, etc. But we also see that in these sacred places, or where we have excessive tourism, and then consequently, as a result, the growth happens to take care of the seasonal rush of the tourists. So this is the example that what we remember is that Kedarnath tragedy, which was partly to a result of the kind of a development that took place, because in order to take care of those pilgrims which were coming. Now, also another basic factor that we have to see is like what attracts tourists to historic towns per se. Is it the historic significance really, or the historic value, or the sacredness, whether it's the religious structures like temples, etc., or fairs and festivals, or its performing arts, or its traditional cuisine or handicrafts, etc. Or is it the unique activities which attract more tourists? Like we have unique activities all over the country, whether it is the desert festival in Rajasthan to Hornbill Festival in Nagaland, or boat race in the south in Kerala, or Shanti Niketan. Or we have activities all over the country, like whether some of them are related to festivals like Kulu Dashera or Deepavali, etc. So, or is it, when we look at the historic towns and tourism, is it the historic value that most tourists come for, or is it the aesthetic appeal of the built environment the tourists come for? And also, what role does the level and quality of tourist infrastructure play besides the historic significance? These are the questions I'm trying to address, like whether it is the quality of the accommodation, the food, and the other safety emergency facilities also. And also another factor is that tourism to some extent is also governed by whether every member all member and families have something of interest to them, because not everybody is interested in only the historic value or the cultural. Maybe the younger members of the family have other interests. So if a place provides all of that, and then finally it's the overall quality of the place or the ambience of the place which attracts. So whether it is all these things together, or is it only the or it's finally it's the image of the place. When we look at it, it's the kind of memorable experiences, whether you have it or somebody else has it, and then it goes by word of mouth or by publicity. So that overall image of the place also plays a very strong role to the first-time tourists and more to the repeat tourists which are coming again. And then how much role does the publicity or the information and the awareness plays in that? So, and then now when we look at the interrelationship between natural environment tourism, natural places have obviously been centers of tourist attraction because of their picturesqueness or the aesthetic appeal or the views that they provide, or it is because of the unique settings, or it's the combination of landscape and the built form character, or it's the serenity or the tranquility of the places. For example, what came to my mind was the hill towns, where because of the unique setting, picturesqueness, and also the serenity or tranquility of that place and the salubrious climate, that played the role in attracting the tourists. But then we have seen the adverse effects of excessive or seasonal tourism. See, one is excessive, the other is seasonal, because it's not round the year. So when it is concentrated in 2 and 3 months, it has its own implication on the kind of development that takes place and the activities and the economy of the town. Now, these adverse effects are like, for example, one most is the vehicular traffic, which has obviously spoiled what were called the pedestrians' paradise. Those places, like, for example, the small road in Nainital, or along with the noise, it's the kind of ambience gets spoiled, besides the parking problems or these new structures, parking garages, etc., that come. And we can see this as a result of the consequential change in the built form. So these kind of diminish the very qualities which were responsible for the attraction of the place in the first place, that particular place. Now, when we look at the second issue, intangible cultural heritage and tourism, like I said, what determines the success of historic towns with popular tourist centers? Is it the connectivity, or is it the quality of infrastructure? And also it determines is the financial position of the local authorities, which, in spite of whatever be the number of tourists coming to that place, are able to or do ensure a good quality infrastructure. Like, this is what happens in bigger cities, where the financial position of the local authorities is much better, and they have a lot of budget, so they can create that better infrastructure, and they don't depend only on tourism for their economic activities. Whereas when we come to the smaller towns, where even when they have intangible cultural heritage, because of their less infrastructure and finances of the local, which are available with the local bodies, the issues are different. And now this is what I'm going to discuss in context of Almora. It's a small hill town that's located in the state of Uttarakhand, around 360 kilometers from Delhi, and at an altitude of around 5,000 feet. It was made, though this area has been inhabited right since I think, prehistoric period, because there are caves and cave paintings, of that particular period near the town which are there. And there are records of this area being inhabited, but it became the capital of the Rajas of this area called Kumaon in 1560, around that time, and it remained the historical capital almost till around middle of 19th century, when this center of this commissionary, what we said, was shifted to Nainital. Now this is a town which is located on the hill top, as we say, on the ridge, and there are two sides, the rivers are there. Now this is why cultural capital is, maybe because it remained there as the capital, and so and also it is the home to, or rather the biggest, it's considered important because of the temple of Nanda Devi, who's supposed to be the ruling deity or goddess of that particular region. And there are others. There's what is called, there's a god of justice, what is called Guru Devta, which is, the temple is located few kilometers from Almora town. And besides the local regional, temples dedicated to regional gods and goddesses, Almora also has one of the very few, only two, I think, sun temples which are built on a mountainous site, that one being this one, which is still intact. That is Katarmal Sun Temple, which is few kilometers, 10-12 kilometers from the town. And besides that sun temple, there are other renowned complexes of temple complexes. They are near Almora. That's a few, 50-60 kilometers away. That's one is a Jageshwar temple complex and the Bajnath temple complex. All of them are very ancient, and in fact Jageshwar is one of the Jyotirlings, 12 Jyotirlings in the country. Besides the religious importance of this area, there are these various dance forms, and like, for example, the Dashera in Kumaon, of which is held in this fair in Almora, is very unique because of the kind of characters that play, and also the number of effigies that are burnt, which are very different from the conventional one which is there. And then there are these different dance forms, and besides the dance forms and music also, which is a folk music, etc., which is partly religious, but also it is folk tales, etc., which are recorded in a musical melodies, etc., what are called jagar in that area. And then there are these ethnic wares that you can now find only shops within this area. Then this art, what is called epen, the floor, the painting of the floor and the walls, they are for each purpose, whether they are very different. And then it is known for the copperware, and there is a whole neighborhood where people who used to be employed, and this is inhabited by those. And most renowned of this area is the wood craftsmanship of this. The houses in Kumaon have a intricate wood craftsmanship, and compared to, this entire hill region has, whether it is Uttarakhand region, that means Kumaon, Garhwal, or it is Himachal, and all the buildings are built with wood. But here we find a lot of intricate craftsmanship, as you can see, and most of it is at the entrance door, what is called kholi here, the one below you can see. And the kind of decoration that you have at the entrance and the number of steps is what determines the socio-economic level of the person. It displays that, otherwise the house form is just the same for all types of houses. And then in the windows, doors and windows, one can see a variety of this. Now it has a very peculiar architectural style, where there is a main street, which is the main market street, which is like any traditional street of any traditional Indian town, with shops on the ground floor and houses on the upper floor. You can see on the left slide, and on both sides there is a stretch where we have houses of this type on both the sides. And then then there are houses which are on the outer, mohallas, etc., which are independent houses. There are individual houses, or there are also houses like the one top right hand side is a house what is called Naghara, because there are 9 units in that under one roof. And so these are kind of which display the traditional knowledge and traditional craftsmanship. And another very unique point of this particular area are the structures which are built to cover the natural springs. In fact, Almora was, the site was chosen for capital, it is said, as because it had a few hundred springs within the 300 feet of the reach from the ridge, which is very, very rare occurrence in the mountainous areas. So they were, in order to protect them, these structures, what are known as nolas, have been built, whether it is in the outer area or within the city. So some of them are very close, like we can see now, and some of them, the construction is so close to them that the buildings have been constructed now very close to them, adversely affecting these, which we'll see later. Now, but the issue is when it has so much of traditional, intangible cultural heritage as well as vernacular architecture, and it is located on a ridge like many other hill towns. Why is it not a popular tourist destination? Maybe because it has, there is no unique natural feature or that kind of picturesqueness which is associated with other hill settlements of the region, or maybe it's the absence of other activities. What the tourists normally say is because other activities, like besides seeing this, they need to have other recreational or activities of interest to keep them busy or to keep them involved. And then also it is the quality of infrastructure, tourist infrastructure, like accommodation. And more than accommodation, it is the restaurants, etc. We don't have, people say you don't have good dining spaces, etc. You cannot go for any entertainment in the evenings, or what does one do if you stay in a place like that? And then also the issue is of public transport, absence of public transport to the nearby places of interest.
Can we wind up in 2 minutes, please?
Also, it is because the steeply sloping terrain results in the paths being very steep to many of these houses. For example, most of these houses are, other than the main market street, which is on the ridge, which is flat almost, but the others are along a very steeply sloping paths, all these nolas, etc. And so these are largely pedestrian and on steeply sloping paths, so which is not really preferred so much by the tourists, where they prefer easy vehicular access to every place that they want to go and visit. And also it could be partly to less awareness of the cultural, heritage, intangible cultural heritage, and the activities that take place, that don't take place. In spite, though recently they have started from 2018 Almora Festival, where for 3 or 4 days that cultural festival happens and different dances, etc., and music is taken place. And also Almora is home to what is that Uday Shankar Academy for Music and Dance, which is a very old academy, but then it was not in use, and lately a new building has been made, but that building itself is in a very modernistic style kind of a thing, and does not reflect the traditional architectural style. Now, the major problems, or the main issues and problems, what we see is, because essentially it is the revenue of the local authorities. And also we see the declining level of pride, interest, and awareness in ICH among local young generation. And of course, tourists is there, that they don't know much about it. And so it is giving rise to demolition of old traditional buildings. Like you can see in the market now, it's the same street that I showed earlier with those traditional houses. Now these are the kind of houses which are being built in that market area. And so these are being, and also additions and alterations are being done, which are not in sync with the existing traditional architecture of those buildings. So conserving old buildings in light of changing needs and lack of any financial incentives are major issues. And then this another issue is, which is this drying up of knolls. Out of the more than few hundreds, now there are only 30-40 where there is a trickle of water. Only 10 or 12 of them are still functional, which have reasonable quantity of water in them, and some of them are contaminated also. So it's a pathetic state of these. Like you can see, like this is on the right one, this all these have become dried up because there was this one hotel got constructed right next to it. We can see the boundary wall here. So this particular area is called itself, that area is called Champa Nola because there was a Nola, but then the Nola has dried up. So this you can see in many of these areas there. And now, of course, in addition, then we have the issues or problems related to the built form, like changes in the built form character. We can see this very stark contrast to the kind of building bulk, the scale and the style, and also the unsustainable practices which result into a kind of debris and instability of hill slopes, etc., landslides, etc. So now, what do we do about it? The probable approaches, to me, I think in addition to increasing awareness about intangible cultural heritage, would also require having regular cultural events or activities which can be publicized and then accordingly attract people, the tourists. Then for the existing building, the adaptive reuse, there are one or two buildings where the adaptive use has been, made, and then also giving incentives for conserving the old buildings, because most of the owners there are grumbling that they don't have the finances and they would, it requires, the woodwork requires a lot of maintenance, etc. Essentially, it is the eco-synergetic approach that needs to be adopted, whether it is for promoting tourism or it is for architecture, urban development, because what it requires is ensuring eternal perpetuity or regeneration of these unique, intangible as well as tangible aspects. That should not be allowed to be consumed or destroyed by tourism, and then retain these inherent values, cultural values, traditions, architectural heritage, or the identity of the place. So for that, what we need to do is to graduate the pace of tourism and growth so as to give local people time to adjust to the facilities over a period of time, and not really many tourists coming at concentrated, and to set optimal and not maximum targets of tourism. And also, in addition, we should make tourism a prime educative force for enthusing a sense of consciousness and responsibility of upkeeping and protecting the environment in locals and tourists. In fact, there are many institutes, academic institutes there, which have started giving courses, master's level courses in tourism and tourism management, etc., where along with the knowledge of the cultural heritage of the place, these two together can not only provide employment to the youth where they become guides, etc., but then it is to educate the local as well as the tourists for it, and ensuring the sustainable development. But however, on this path, there will obviously be certain challenges, and some of the challenges that what I can foresee are overcoming the financial constraints for improving the quality of infrastructure. That is very, very important for anything to begin with, because it's a vicious cycle. Tourists don't come because you don't have a good infrastructure. The good infrastructure, or rather better quality infrastructure, is not there because there isn't enough revenue for the operators or owners to create that good quality infrastructure. So somewhere that has to be taken care. Then exploring potential of ICH for enhancing revenue generation, but without endangering it, has to be seen, because it should not happen like
Dr. Pushpalata will have to wind up.
That the essential quality or the essence or the fundamental knowledge of the heritage itself gets becomes only a means of recreation, entertainment, or an art form. The essential value also has to remain the same. Like this is what has happened in case of Thayyam, for that matter. From a sacred ritual to it has become an art form which is more for market or more for tourist attraction, etc. So the essence was to nurture the nature, natural forest, etc. But that has gone when it has become more of an art form for only attracting people, because that fundamental understanding is not there. then the managing this conflicts between economic gains through tourism and degradation of this natural environment and cultural heritage. And in addition to this, the management of the traditional knowledge is of essence, because, okay, we can conserve or preserve the artifacts in terms of, or manifestations in terms of either, activities or buildings or something, but the underlying knowledge, like for example, the wood craftsmanship or people who are making nollas, who know how to construct nollas. So that is the art which is dying actually. So there are only, in fact, I was reading somewhere, there's only one last person who built the Nala, or there is only one person near this particular place who still makes this, wooden windows, etc., with this carving. So managing or preserving this traditional knowledge and also collecting it, or rather for depository, making a depository of that knowledge also is important. So it is actually becomes an issue or challenge of ensuring cultural continuity vis-a-vis the need for the change in the society, which is bound to happen. As we say, change is the only constant. So that is going to happen. Yet at the same time, we have to be, we have to be proud of our heritage and maintain one's cultural heritage and values, because that is what is priceless. So we need to really try and strike a balance between the two. Thank you. That's it from my side.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pushparata. That was very interesting, especially looking at small towns in a very different context. I'll quickly go over to Dr. Mona Lisa Mahajan. And Mona Lisa has a PhD in art history. She's a member of ICOMOS Nepal, an expert member in NSC ICH International Scientific Committee of ICOMOS. Her current research is on anthropology of inscription projects at Heidelberg University through the Nepal Heritage Documentation Project. Taking the examples of cities and towns in Kathmandu Valley, which are the result of 1,000 years of evolution, she'll be talking about the festivals and traditional events seen in the narrow alleys and squares of the valley that not only attract a huge local crowd, but also hold equal potential for tourism. The focus is on continuity of ICH, which could lead to sustainability of cities' economic contribution to tourism. Over to you, Mona Lisa.
Thank you so much, Niti. Let me share my slide.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So my presentation is on ICH, Soul of the Historic Town. This is from Kathmandu Valley. So it's quite difficult to present this whole thing in 10 minutes, but I will try my best. Further, we can read in my paper. To have a brief background of Kathmandu Valley, Kathmandu Valley has cities and villages and towns. Like major cities are Kathmandu, Patan, and Bhaktapur. These cities are also in the UNESCO World Heritage Site monument zone, which are 7 in Kathmandu Valley, and out of the 3, they are the whole cities. And apart from that, the Kathmandu is also the capital city, so which adds to the other dimension of the problem of the cities. And Kathmandu Valley has thousands of years of evolutions, and with the constant evolution that are still taking place. And we have this, the cities have this planned structures. These are not just for the, these are for the people, like the squares, alleys, temples, and festival. Like these squares, you can see these ponds where people can go and sit, and this water spout, they were for the daily uses, and there are still some, many are still functional, many are dead. And this courtyard, so these things are where people have the actual interaction with these things. And what makes this cities interesting are the ICS, intangible practices associated with these things. So for example, the procession that takes place in the cities, in the squares, and the chariot festivals and mask dances you can see all around the year. It's not only the public festival, but also the private events that takes place in public, like rituals, like the social practices. And most of these practices, they are still functional, and they are not just for the touristic purpose, but because we have a very less touristic approach to the ICS, which is in a sense very good as well. Without the tourism, it has been still continuing. And one of the main interesting things of Kathmandu Valley is you can still see the Kathmandu Valley, which was 100 years back. The glimpses of the past is still in the present. These things, they are not for touristic purpose, they are for the personal thing. And the beauty of this, the events within Kathmandu Valley, they are not just religious, they are not just for the social integration, but also for they have like the big part of the these activities, they have the entertainment factor as well. You can see when you are walking in the street and the different alleys, you might encounter one of these things, like if you're, don't be surprised with this thing. So this is the public event that takes place, the private event that takes place in the public arena. This is in the public square, and you can see this young kids playing the musical instrument in one of these auspicious months called Gula. So this is like a big event, like with the huge crowd. And when we see the tourism, like Nepal has a lot of potential with tourism, and Kathmandu is a gateway for the tourism, because the major tourism enters to Kathmandu, international tourism comes to Kathmandu, Nepal with the from Kathmandu. As we have, till now, we have just one airport, the international airport. The other one is going to be open for soon. And tourism has a contribution of 4.5. This is official data in 2018. 4.45 contribution to the Nepal's GDP, but according to the people who are involved in the tourism, they tell like it might be up to 10%, as there are so many other informal sectors that has not included in this data. And talking about the Kathmandu Valley, the other side of the Kathmandu Valley, what you have seen, these interesting things, very cool things, but the other side of the Kathmandu Valley is the area of 933 square kilometer near about, and the population of 2.4 million. And it's one of the fastest growing cities in South Asia. And it has the constant pressure of development, urbanization, the crowd, and everything, all the things that you can imagine in all these metro cities. Let me explain these things with my picture. This was like a few years back, not few years back, few decades back, like this was in 1960s. And what is this, a picture of this area? This is also one of the World Heritage Site, Monument Zone. And now, like few years back, so this is what it looks. So you can see what is the pressure of the urbanization in Kathmandu Valley. So we have this constant pressure over choosing over the historic city and the modern cities, and this wide road over the narrow lanes. Like everybody wants this big car, and everybody wants the big houses, you know, this all things. And with the ICS and tourism, like in the tourism in Nepal is mostly, whenever you hear about the Nepal, either you hear about like 70s hippies or the mountains, you know, like there have been the constant domination. And also the tourism brochure, they have been dominated with the mountains and also the monuments. The ICS factor has a very little this domination over those promotions. But lately, in few years back, the Nepal Tourism Board, which is responsible for this tourism promotional campaign, they have started this featuring lots of this tourism, like ICS activities with the festivals, rituals, marks, dances, because they are so vibrant, colorful, and exciting. So and also this is like it's quite ironic, like a 2020 Visit Nepal 2020, but this was the logo design for that year. Like Nepal government had planned to attract 2 million tourists from 2020 onwards. And you can see this man with this traditional umbrella, and it's one of the scene of this festival. So with this inclusion of this logo, it seems like a integration of like focusing on the ICS for the future initiatives of this tourism. What you can see is like other part is these cities, like they have this historic potential of the a lot of potential for the tourism, because most of these traditional activities that takes place within this historic core. But as Professor Simon, he has aware, like for with the like a constant threat of the tourism. But we have seen in all the historic cities of Europe, like Amsterdam, Venice, they don't want tourism nowadays, but this can happen in Kathmandu Valley too. But one of the things that tourism can do in future is like it can help to generate this historic town, which has been abandoned by these natives, because they want the bigger house with the big lawns, with the like a big toilet, big things like a parking space and everything. So there has been the people like who have been leaving this their traditional homes and staying outside, and the people who live there, they don't have this association of the ICH and the like they don't have this association with the place. So these things, there has been like a interruption, like the start of the interruption in those practices, you know. And but tourism might regenerate those things with the help of this manufacture. Like there are some places in Patan where people have started to to give the traditional houses for the tourists, and targeting this tourism. They have modeled the houses that way. But we have to be very careful of those factors of tourism where the Airbnb takes over, and you know this people can't rent this their one place because of the high monetary values. And there has to be the proper plan, like from the very beginning, because I think it's a time we should also think about these factors in Kathmandu Valley, because the tourism has not penetrated that well in the ICS. So if we are very mindful from now, like so to plan how we will channel the tourist in those practices and those things, so it will be like we can prevent a lot of this future troubles. So yeah, I want to end my presentation here. If I keep on going, then I might lose the track of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monalisa. And yeah, it was very interesting to especially look at that, you know, all these ICH practices are actually something which is inherent with the community, and they are their own practices and own activities, festivals, but which sometimes, you know, it can become a spectacle for the tourism, and then how it can be channeled in that direction. But they also have their own fallout at some point of time, I think. I'll next go to Ishita Shah, our last speaker, who will be talking about curating a play of knowledge systems. So Ishita is a designer and historian, and her practice revolves around the idea of curating for culture. In the current pandemic, she has been conducting virtual programs on family personal archiving to discuss creative possibilities for archives in India and the global south. Her paper looks at community participation. So on one hand, it is inevitable that heritage tourism identifies with ICH and expands the role of community participation, but it is equally important that the local residents are empowered and capacity building is incorporated within this framework. This presentation, running across historic sites, highlights the need for structured exchange across diverse knowledge systems to ensure ownership and sustenance of the community-led tourism initiative. Over to you, Ishita.
Thank you, Niyati. I hope I'm audible and clear.
Very clear.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for staying along until the fifth speaker. I think you all have heard a lot. And I hope that my presentation it adds to the conversation, if not do anything new. And thank you everyone at ECOMOS for this fantastic management of the seminar. I'm quite thrilled with the cross exchange that's already happening on this platform. So the difference that I think this presentation will sort of bring about in the conversation today is really the how. I think a lot of questions in the earlier presentation was about how, and I think one is trying over here to answer that how. So the case studies or case study here rather is more pedagogical, and it's not necessarily where we have found a solution as such. So we have been curating various kinds of pedagogical explorations, and we have worked across different kinds of historic towns, be it Gulbarga, Bidar, in North Karnataka. We also were in Srirangapatna with Intact Bangalore as our partners. And what we're going to talk about today is one of the first attempts at this, which was in 2017, contesting heritage. And gladly we had collaborated with ICOMOS India at that point as well. Before I go forward, I definitely must credit that this work is not even slightest bit of it is not only mine. There were about 30 students and 2 other co-facilitators, Shrijan and Shriparna, who have sort of made this possible, and a much larger team on ground from the communities. What we did with Contesting Heritage, it was an open studio. It was supposed to be transdisciplinary, so the students were also not necessarily from heritage design background only. They were looking at AR, VR, they were students of information arts and design and public space design and so on and so forth. And they were given this curatorial note. I'm not going to read out everything, but the key questions were what led or what leads to new practices in heritage management. How are we interpreting heritage before we subject it to conservation, alteration, or demolition, and who decides? I think this is the question which I think most of us have been trying to answer in our own ways over the years. The logic of curating this program was based out of contested sites, as the name suggests, and we wanted to look at something that's accessible, so looking at Karnataka. But also looking at the diverse time zones and looking at different contexts. So we also had Joke Falls, whereas we had Manipal Heritage Village, along with Hampi and Jewtown, which are sort of understandable. What is also important to credit or to note over here is how the studies were conducted with the help of local mentors or regional mentors. The faculty members, us from Bangalore or Shrishti, we did not really head out with the students. They went on by themselves and they met with Mr. Ashok Hegde or with Tanya in Jewtown, and then discovered what local mentorship means in terms of more community members and community practices. What they were also sort of subjected to were some very critical provocations, which seemed the need of the hour, also something which sort of flagged off from what was being discussed at ICOMOS Global Assembly 2017. And we were asking very important questions where policy or where bureaucracy, as well as post-colonial theories sort of meet heritage and history. So sort of taking heritage design and management practice out of its own silo. I'm not again going into details of these. And then what was important is the methodologies, which was, as I mentioned earlier, there was the most important aspect was site interaction, which was sort of self-curated by the, the students themselves, because these are postgraduate students. So whether they need to meet the performers, whether they need to collect archival objects, from that to doing secondary research in terms of what has been written about vernacular heritage, what has been written about heritage village, and why is there a question around vernacular economy. So these were the initial parts. Largely what the month, 4 weeks looked like was also introducing them to other forms of practices and other forms of knowledge systems. So from having performers talk to them to have artists talk to them and conservators. So before the visit, what did these interactions mean when external experts come and talk to you? How does it shape your understanding of historic towns and heritage? Does it help your individual inquiry? And then when you have now been on site, you know the on-ground realities, you have heard them. So when you come back and you listen to, or you discuss rather your outputs and your responses with external mentors again, how does it inform your practice, and what are the bounds or the boundaries that you sort of cross over? So what it led to was quite interesting forms of work, and I am just showing you some samples due to paucity of time, but it was very important to become the voice, and I think that itself has its own contestations or criticality. But yes, in this moment, the interest of the students was to become a voice for the community or for the heritage site, and thus, keeping in mind, where does intangible cultural heritage, natural heritage, where do all these components sort of fit in, and how do you make them a part of your responses? I hope I have time to play the clip. I mean, I don't need to play it all, but maybe a little bit.
Yeah, please.
I changed them and they changed me. It all began with an explorer in blue. Swiftly he arrived with his fleet. Once and again, and then again. This time to make me his own. And thus the seeds were sown and a story began. Sailing like seagulls, dancing on the waterfront. Oh, the hustle and bustle. The people and the ships, some left, some stayed, creating marvels in their wake. Churches, forts, and the war. Devastated and demolished I stood, engulfed in flames, and thus I ceased to exist. Resurrected as a Dutch window, my wooden self a sash adorns. Time's flourishing, a play of breeze, exchange of compliments on the streets. A mother feeding her child, soldiers courting the maidens, the maids sweeping outside. Oh, the sweet silent times. Then came British compliments, the highlight, a rain tree, dotting the area with its massive.
Sorry, I'm not sure. Have I lost the connection? Or am I audible?
You are audible, but that part was not audible after. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I was actually. Okay, my screen sharing stopped for some reason. Just give me a minute to go back to that. So in the meanwhile, I think, yeah, I was pausing it because I know that we will run out of time. But what I would want to sort of highlight with that clip or with that film was, is my presentation visible?
Yes.
Okay, so what I was highlighting is how Window became a protagonist, and Window from the houses of Jewtown, because there were so many other stories to tell from the community, from their understanding and appreciation of what is their heritage. And this is a community which is otherwise in conflict or in contestation rather about do they really belong to Kochi, or does Kochi belong to them? So these questions about whose land it is and whose ownership it is, and could this be told in more creative ways? And this was another alternative project which I wanted to show. Sorry, I'm just looking for present mode. So this is the other example where the team has basically looked at the stories which sort of underlie the history and the heritage at Joke Falls. So it's not only about natural heritage, but really about what the community or what the folklore sort of say about that place. And hence, ICH would preserve, or intangible cultural heritage would preserve the heritage or the built and the natural, versus the natural or the built would automatically sort of speak for intangible cultural heritage, and so on and so forth. So this is, again, when you see it in the Gulbarga project, it was arts and crafts of Gulbarga which became protagonists. And in Srirangapatna, we were looking at how the voices of the community could become a part of the dossier. So each of these exercises have then obviously led to another scale of interaction and exchange, which is to either take it to ECOMOS India and speak to professionals and experts who have been looking at heritage and heritage issues. Whereas in Bangalore, when we had the conference after we came back from Delhi, we invited some of the community members, but also again practitioners from diverse fields within Bangalore, who would sort of want to talk about Karnataka and its heritage and tourism. So constantly there has been an attempt to allow for or facilitate rather exchange of knowledge systems. And hence it sort of leads us to this abstract, which I'm sort of putting forth for this presentation, and hopefully one will write something about it, is why does this exchange stop at urban practices and engagements? What would it mean like if the community was equally a part of this exchange? So while they are more passively in terms of discussions, in terms of sharing their knowledge, in terms of some cases, of course, even them knowing about how the students have been designing or how the practices have been taking the case forward into an advocacy platform. But more than that, so could this exercise or these kind of exercise have been done with the community members themselves, and hence ensure that, you know, while in COVID we couldn't have been there, they could have still continued leading community-led tourism initiatives. That's about it from my end. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Niyati.
Thank you so much. And yeah, listening to the window becoming a protagonist, that was very interesting. I think I would have loved to, you know, listen to that entire piece, and yeah, we hope to do it sometime. So thank you so much. And I think considering the time, I think I will jump into the panel discussion so that we have all the speakers on the screen, and we can start, because there are many questions which have come up in the chat also. And yeah. So there were two questions which were asked to Dr. Raymond, and he has already answered on the chat, but I would still like to, you know, put them into this thing here, and people can actually have a look at them. It talks about that what are the, basically looking at which SDGs does ICH tourism contribute to? So where I think Dr. Raymond has already answered, looking at 1, 5, 8, and 9. And there was also one more question which I think came up, which I think I'll take it through. But Dr. Raymond, I was also trying to look at the presentation that because it was very interesting when you started off by saying that we also need to look at what are we actually promoting, and that's very important to understand, because you started with looking at practices which are part of the community also, then also a lot of these practices or rituals which are not actually on any kind of a ICH or list, but they are still, you know, part of the rituals that everybody follows. And sometimes, you know, these tourism also, the tourists also get into this. Also, there are a lot of these private ceremonies which are not for the tourists, and they have a separate thing of how they work with it. And also experiential tourism, where we look at all different kinds of experiences. You know, inventing of tourism or inventing of traditions is one very important or a critical facet that has come up now, in the sense that a lot of things are actually invented just for, you know, for the promotion of tourism at the end of it. So I just wanted to ask you that if we can we list, I know there might be, it's a whole lot of things, but still if we can, you know, put down into 2 or 3 important strategies that are critical for sustainable tourism, that is sensitive to needs of heritage, and also contribute to the socio-economic well-being of the local communities, because that's a very problem sector where it's not easy at the management level.
Hey, all right. Maybe let's say simply that tourism is a business. It's not a charity organization. Its goal is not social development, it's business. And like every business, they need to get good return of their investment. But we also need to understand tourism is a multi-sectoral industry. It's not just one industry. There's no one body that controls tourism. To work, it needs inputs from many different sectors: accommodation, F&B, transportation, and then it needs the supply of products that they can use for tourism. So culture, nature, these are big attractions, but people also travel for all sorts of other reasons. So that means that we need to understand the type of tourists that we have. Yes, some are really interested in understanding and experiencing other cultures. They're very respectful, but we also know there are many tourists who just travel for fun. Now, are we going to open a very sensitive part of our life, which are intangible aspects of our culture heritage, to all sorts of tourists? But then who is in charge of managing, controlling tourism? As I said, there are so many different bodies involved. Now, if you think about other industries, not just talking about culture and tourism, but tourism or in industry in general, you may have a hotel, international chain operating in different countries. One country has a very strong environmental law. They would not allow the discharge of sewage without treating them properly, or they have to be energy efficient in many different ways. Another country doesn't have this law. And it was seen over and over again, the same company operating in those countries where there's no strong regulation for environmental protection, they don't care about them, they don't follow them, they don't implement them. So that's the industry that we are dealing with. So that then for them, heritage is just a product that can be exploited for tourism purpose, whether it's culture or nature, doesn't matter. Now, who is in charge of managing these resources? So we say, okay, the heritage professionals are in charge of managing these resources. But if it's a tangible heritage, the heritage, so-called the heritage managers, control is in a very limited space. Boundary is very limited. And tourists don't just come to one spot within a city. They do everything. They need everything. To work, you need accommodation, you need transportation, you need food. They love shopping. So then how we do that? In Paris, in their certain parts, the French restaurants close down and they change into Chinese restaurants because these places are frequented by Chinese tourists and they demand Chinese food. So, how are we going to manage this kind of changes or forces of changes? So this is where we need to really think that if we want to invite guests to our houses, we should have a control of who comes to our houses and what they can do and what they cannot do. If they are not respectful, we don't allow them to come to my house. Now, saying this is easy. On principle, we will agree, but how are we going to implement this in a historic town, which is very open, which is, anybody can come in and go and do whatever they want. So this is where we need to work with them. Now, we can't fight with the tourism industry. Tourism industry is a very powerful, it's one of the biggest industries in the world. So then we can't really just say no to them, but we have to find a way how we can actually, work with them and, deal with this powerful tool for change in a meaningful way. And this is where, we talk about partnership, we talked about understanding each other's needs. We are a long way way from having a sustainable partnership with the tourism industry. But we should not treat them as an enemy. This is a business. And so they will try their best to make, maximize their profit, right? But then, somebody somewhere has to draw a line. Right. So, and as long as it benefits us, others can benefit too. So the win-win situation, it doesn't come easily. And we can't just think tourism as a marketing tool that, okay, we market it and then something good will happen. We really need to understand, how the industry works and how we can work with them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Imon. And Professor Kausar, it was very interesting, this example, trying to, because that's what we have been also talking in, that's especially the first session where we're looking at that, how the intangible can actually bring about a change in the tangible, which is where your example comes in, that how the one activity which began as, just a food street, or it was basically a restaurant, which now finally changed the entire tangible fabric of that entire area. And, you have all these facades and everything that has come in. So looking at all this, there was also a question for you, which comes from Shahila Bisnani. He questions you that to what extent do you think the emergence of restaurants in this area has to do with minimizing the character of the area and gentrification, rather than increasing tourism and making historic places accessible? So would you like to answer that?
Hello?
Professor
Hello?
Kausar? I think you are muted, Professor Kausar.
Is that for me?
No, that was for Professor Kausar, but I think he's muted.
Okay.
Yeah. He's just trying to see what is. Yeah. Professor Kausar, are you listening?
There's too much noise somewhere.
Okay. Okay. So, could you hear the question, or do I repeat it?
No, I didn't. Question clear.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So basically, the question was that to what extent do you think the emergence of the restaurants in this area has to do with minimizing that character of the area and gentrification, rather than increasing tourism and making historic places accessible?
You mean to say the type of restaurants over there?
Yeah, so basically it's trying to say that, how these coming up of these restaurants have actually minimized the character of the area, and gentrification, which has, come up, because rather than we are looking at the increasing and making them accessible. So
actually, what has really happened is that, it's not, it was initially a red light area, the dancing area,
yeah,
where the food street exists now. And but somewhere in the 60s or 70s, those dancing girls were actually moved out, most of them. So it doesn't have, it is no longer that kind of an area. But yes, there are certain schools, music schools, and also some families are still there. But the problem that that I see is from the other end, from the fort and the Badshai Mosque. That's where the problem is, because the experience is altered over there. So when in this case particularly you are dealing with a historical area and an area which is very popular for tourism. So some kind of a balance would have been there, in the sense that if the building would have been like 3-story high, I don't think there was much problem, because Badshai Mosque is about it's about 70-80 steps, meaning it's fairly high from the ground level. And earlier, when you used to go there inside the monument, you wouldn't see anything, because because the walls are also fairly high, and the mosque is also fairly high, located at that fairly location. Now, coming back to, for example, now I know what the Aga Khan people do in Hunza or in Gilgit or Baltistan area. they give about, they only retain 6% of their earning, and the rest goes to the community. So that is something beautiful over there. But here the community has not gained anything. And all these restaurants are owned by people other than the Cuckoo Den, who was a local living over there. He was the first one, as I said, who started this business. But most of them are outside, and the people have moved out. I don't know whether I've answered the question or not.
Yeah, I can bring out a lot of aspects to the entire dialogue that we are looking at.
There's noise somewhere because yeah.
Dr. Pushpalata, it was very interesting, especially the example, definitely Kumaon is one region which is, even though it is not so much, looked at as a touristic thing, but it definitely has a lot of potential and very interesting. Sometimes I feel that it is always good that, it doesn't become a tourist attraction, because otherwise it might destroy most of its, resources, which definitely has happened, especially when you look at small towns. And you also brought out all the aspects where we look of what makes it into a touristic thing, or what are the different aspects that we are looking at. Whether you talk about activities, we talk about just one image, we are talking about climate, connectivity, infrastructure. So it's not only about having just a good hotel and a road connectivity, which is important, but there are a lot of facets which actually come into this to make it into a touristic place. So there was a question for you from Aditya Banerjee, where he talks about, just wanted to ask you about he appreciates the amazing presentation that you made, and he wanted to ask about the old British buildings in Almora. Even they need immediate attention as they were in a dilapidated state. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, colonial buildings built during that period are there, but I purposely didn't put that part into it because one is it was intangible cultural heritage. The focus was there. So, and because the traditional vernacular buildings do have a lot of cultural beliefs and their lifestyle and value system and, all the symbolism, etc., which is attached in their traditional buildings. But yes, those buildings are, have the main problem there is that many of the owners of those buildings don't live there. So they are logged. But fortunately, they are not in a state of dilapidation. They are relatively well built and, they're more sturdy kind. So yes, maintenance issues would be there, general ones, but it's unlike other places like Nainital for that matter, where many of the old colonial buildings like bungalows, etc., cottages, they were demolished and new hotel buildings have come up, or some other, kind of buildings have come up. And that's a boon of less tourism in Almora, that those buildings are not yet demolished or anything like that, because the commercial gains are not there as much. But yes, that is also, those buildings are part of our heritage. We have to accept that because colonial heritage is also there. So it is true that those buildings are there, but they are not there in the main city part of it. The main town, where the main bazaar street, which is about 2-3 kilometers long. So they are outside on the outer, not even in the older mohallas. Most of these are a little away, from the main part of it. So they are not really, they are part of our heritage. They would need to be conserved, but as of now, I don't see any immediate danger to their existence, if I have answered that question. And I did not include it in this because the focus was on cultural heritage.
Yeah, I think it would have been very interesting to see much more about Kumaon, but yeah, obviously we have a time constraint. There was also one small this thing which I started off with by saying that when we talk about small towns, it always has the risk of being overpowered by tourists. And so how do you think, how can this be addressed? Because when we start actually working with infrastructure and all the other parameters of developing tourism, this problem will always be there at the threshold of where or how you can, address this issue of overpowering by the tourism, especially. So can something be done about it, or how do you have some kind of a restriction, or I don't know, which way can we look at it? Because
Sorry, I think there is some audio issue. I was not able to get it clear. Can you just be very brief on that, on infrastructure? What?
Yes,
actually, the noise is from Niyati's side.
Yeah, there is a lot of disturbance.
There is no noise from my thing because
I could hear Pushpa clearly without any problem.
I'm really sorry, but here there is nobody around who can actually make any noise. So I don't know why it is happening.
Okay, so can you please repeat it briefly?
Yeah, I'll just be very brief. I was just asking that, small towns, when you actually start working with the infrastructure and other, or trying to develop tourism, it can always be overpowered by tourists. So in your view, can we address that issue at some level until, it doesn't become a problem for the communities also and otherwise also? So can there be a threshold of how you can address it?
Yeah, okay, if I got it correctly. See, the thing is, it's a very, very, very difficult issue, actually speaking, because when we want tourism in order to increase our revenue, but regulating tourism, as I also mentioned in my presentation, is very big challenge. Though in principle, yes, we say that we should, in theory, that we say we should regulate tourism, but see, what I see is, if it is a round the year tourism, that's not as much of a problem, because then it can go in a planned manner that one knows, okay, this much. But when it is a seasonal one and concentrated one, then the entire economy, like people also tend to kind of try to aim at more profit than what it is, because they know that 9 months of the year or 10 months of the year, their property will be lying vacant. So that's a very big issue actually in most of these places. Yes. And as I said, this is a vicious circle, but yes, somewhere, if to start with, we can package it in such a way that, they do see that that becomes a base place, and from there they can go to nearby places. They are absolutely outstanding, like Jageshwar. If anybody who has been there, it is simply out of the world area, because the kind of Devdar forest which is there, you have trees, 300 years old trees there, besides the monuments, temples, etc. The thing is that connectivity there, and kind of a good quality stay accommodation, that is the crux of the thing. But then again, because the investors will only come when they see the financial gains, if it breaks even for them. So yes, it is slightly a very delicate, difficult thing. But yes, some control in the sense that if it is known that this level of people would be more or less estimated, or if we have events where we know, all right, this event will have 10,000 people or 5,000 people, then, somewhere everybody can plan for it a little better. That is the difference, because I see Jaisalmer is also a small town for that matter. I have been thinking about it. Okay, that's not a big town, but it survives practically on tourism only, because things are planned and such a, means all things, are there. They would have a desert, safari, they will do this, and it's a kind of packaged in a, they are kind of packages which are involved along with the stay. So I think that kind of approach needs to be taken up by the tourism industry also.
That's true. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, Mona Lisa, you started with, the practices of the community and how they go about it. And then we had that one image where you actually showed from so many years before, and what we are looking at today with, all the infrastructure that has developed around it. So it actually, that one image actually said quite a lot in a way. So Kathmandu Valley is, in a way, it's the biggest magnet for tourism. Everybody knows about that, and especially in South Asia. However, it also has a very, very strong living culture with all its waterworks and other things also. So it has a very interesting way it works. So in your views, how do you think the both of them actually can coexist when we look at, their own culture, and also we are looking at the tourism which come into?
Thank you, Neti, for the question. You mean like how it has been coexist now, or like in the future, you mean?
How it has been coexisting also, and how do you think it will? Because now with the tourism increasing, there would be contestations happening at some level, I'm sure, with the, the local people and
for the knowledge, like I'm not the expert in tourism here, so I might be like I don't have a data, but there are different kinds of tourists in Nepal. Like some come for mountaineering because of like famous mountains, like for trekking for long stays, and some come for like other places where you can just go with the nature. A lot of places where these natural parks and things. And also there's this the monuments and things, like as I have told you earlier, like everybody who wants to come from the international flight, they have to come to Kathmandu even for one day, because right now at the moment we have just one international airport that is in Kathmandu. So these are the like tourism. But if we talk about the living heritage of Kathmandu Valley, the one thing that we could not miss is there is a traditional practices which has been continuing from 5th century until now. This is called Guti. It's a social association of the people. These are within the like indigenous people of Kathmandu Valley called Newar. And the interesting factor of this thing is like whenever this donor who builds a temple or who starts any rituals, they also put the endowment in the form of the jewelries or the land, because there was abundant land in the Kathmandu Valley in the ancient time, still there, but there are also more people. The thing is that they, with the revenues generated by this agricultural land, they could sustain this either restoring the monuments or even the carrying this festivities for centuries, and which has been interrupted in like not that long, some 1769, when the ruler changed and things, they started to destroy. And now after like a Rana regime, and with this the value of the property increase, and also because of this property right land in the change in the Land Act of the Gucci Act by the government, taking all this community land to the nationalized, and they started to give the money like a top-down approach, not by the community taking the lead with all the expenses by themselves, but by government giving some money, which they do. Like some people just give 5 rupees still, which they used to get like 40 years back. So this kind of things they have hampered, but still people are continuing those practices somehow now. But if we have this thing like tourism, like not as a tourism depending solely on tourism, but like in some one form or other form where they can generate some revenue just to continue as some monetary value on it, then I think in future we can do that. But we have to be very careful, especially after the Professor Simon's presentation. This is, there is like in future it's quite tricky. Like I don't have a concrete thing, but with the living heritage, there is also the living practices associated with this. Thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be very challenging, I think. Yeah, Ishita, I think the question to you is basically we are looking at, because you brought out a very important part of our, community participation also, and also it was very interesting to see how this future professionals or future heritage, managers who might be, taking up these sites at some point of time. So how you work with them, and how they also look at heritage, and how they also curate it in a way, because that will be very important for their practices. So the theory to practice, which I think is taken up in that institution, is very important, and it takes, So I would just come down to, some few strategies, overarching strategies, where we can say that, you can effectively engage community for sustainable tourism. Because community would love to be part of tourism, but at times I think they also get threatened by it because of the other problems that they face. So how do you think it can be effectively done?
I think I have a, sorry. You go ahead, please.
Okay. Okay, so I mean, I have two parts to this answer. So one is, of course, empowering them. I mean, please excuse me for I'm going to use this binary for now, them and us, because I'm still learning myself. But yes, empowering them as entrepreneurs or decision makers. And hence, what are the different fields and disciplinary knowledges sort of that can be introduced? And again, I'm not coming from a space which is saying we need to instruct somebody, but rather co-create with them. And how, in that sense, tourism really, or heritage tourism, it becomes a part of everyday community life. Because one of the issues which I don't think we've really touched upon is something that we have come across every other historic town, is the community members also have aspirations. So if they can get an Uber on an Ola job, which is paying them some 25,000, 30,000 rupees a month, I mean, or rather more than that, then for them, that's a better viable option. I mean, it's not really, I don't mean to demean what must be happening in terms of heritage sites and heritage tourism there, but the community members have been very honest about, madam, and I'm going to use Hindi here for the very obvious reasons, कि madam, हमें गाड़ी चलाना आता है तो हम वही करेंगे ना. Which as it translates to saying that I know how to drive a car, so I'm obviously going to choose that. So there comes in the need that do they really associate with the terminologies, the theories, the framework that we associate with when we talk about heritage, preservation, tourism. So it's really a need for a new pedagogical or a more alternative pedagogical framework. And I think that brings me to the second part of the question answer, basically, which is to say that could we have more contextual guidelines and standards? So while the Universal and the UNESCO and the SDGs and all those international standards are equally important, could they be then adapted and appropriated to the needs of the certain historic town or the community with whom you are working? Which is also informed by, most importantly, the terminologies or rather the language of communication that is most suitable in that region. So one of the challenges we have faced, of course, is language, I mean the spoken language, and hence understanding the need for more and more translations or working with more and more community members who could help you understand things, and hopefully things don't get lost in translation. Otherwise, stepping in with all the English or Hindi has always been one of the difficulties in terms of achieving what you wanted to achieve in terms of heritage communication with the community. So similarly, the guidelines and the standards or the theories, they sort of become your hurdles rather than being your aids. I think, yeah, that brings me to Niyati, what you rightly identified, a room for new forms of practices in heritage design, and not to be, not the need to say that only conservationists know how to do conservation and preservation. I think there's a much stronger need for a room or a round table discussion every time a project is looked at. And perhaps possibly, I mean, very idealistically speaking, dropping the power structures if possible. When we say we want community participation, I think we are also still learning. We still walk in with, we know everything, and then you go there and you realize that no, you don't know anything, and it's the community which knows. I think that really needs to be applied to real projects, not just pedagogical experiences. That we need historians, we need conservators, we need community members with perhaps diverse skills, from craftspersons to local historians to urban managers and heritage managers from the city, or from, I mean, of course, I again don't want to make the city and the rural as a binary, but understanding who brings in what kind of a strength on these collaborative practices. And of course, very important strategy would be, I think, funding for such projects. I mean, I think I don't want to lose out that point. because I think all of this sounds very interesting when you put it in the pedagogical institutional domain, which is somehow taking care of all the experimentation. But I think we need more and more organizations which are supporting these experiments and these explorations without the need for concrete outcomes every time, because you're still learning. And in the process of learning, there will be, yes, there will be failures, and let's be okay with that. But that doesn't mean there can't be support and funding for it.
That's great.
I hope that answers.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. Professor Sajat, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I want to share my experience of Hunza. For example, when I went there about 30 years ago, I mean, there was not even water available for a bath even. I mean, we had to send somebody with a balti and say, "Pani leke aao wahan se," you know, darya se nikal ke lao. You know, it was like that. But now, my God, when I went there 2 years ago, it's a different situation altogether. I mean, about 8 lakh local tourists visit Hunza now. But the best part was the involvement of the community. And that really was wonderful, because, you know, all the students, you know, mostly the senior students of 10th class or 10th, 11th onwards, 12th, you know, they go to your school in the morning, and then in the evening, or they help the local police and they control traffic. So I was really amazed to see the involvement of the community over there, and it can really boost the situation, because, you know, but there are, of course, there are problems, because lately I read that, you know, boys and girls from I don't know from which city, but from outside Hunza went there, and they were having some. I mean, they were having some kind of a party, and so, you know, and they're making all sorts of halagula, and the locals were not used to, you know, they want to sleep now. So, so that kind of situation probably we face everywhere. But then, and in the last couple of years in Pakistan, I've seen there's a tremendous, you know, awareness as far as the local tourism is concerned. People are now, and after the COVID, you know, now people are going to all these hill stations all over Pakistan, because, you know, you can't go outside Pakistan generally.
Same as India.
Yeah, same in India.
Yeah. So I think my last question would be to Dr. Imon, which was put in the chat and he has already answered, but I think we would like you to answer it, and also, you know, give your final words on it. Where, somebody has asked you that when thinking about heritage preservation, I'm always concerned about the livelihoods of the families who own land around such monuments, for whom one of the only ways forward is to redevelop the area for financial reasons. Many plans for compensation, etc., haven't always been successful. Which ways can you ensure that it is a guaranteed symbiotic relationship? So you have put a quote, I think, forward, and I think we would like to end with your words on that. Thank you.
Okay, maybe I switch from tourism to urban planning because it's not directly related to tourism. But transfer of development rights, you know, has been used in some places effectively, because it's true, you know, that some development rights are affected when we impose strict heritage conservation measures. And if we're talking about transforming a place for tourism purposes, that's one thing, but redeveloping it just for gaining more, you know, floor area, which could be sold or rented out for economic gain, is another, you know, financial reason. Now, this is kind of a question I receive, and I also think sometimes that what is the solution? But our rights are always curtailed for many reasons. I want to drive in 120, 50 kilometer on the street because I love high-speed driving, but I can't do that because of other reasons for other safeties. Now, can I say my rights are curtailed and I want that right? Now, these heritage conservation restrictions are imposed because we believe that it's important for the greater society. But of course, we need to see if there are ways we can actually help these people. So transfer of development rights, I mean, if they can sell their buildable area to a developer who could build somewhere else, if you can have that mechanism, that solves the problem without affecting our historic area. But the transformation of land use could be a big social subject. It's not just an economic matter, because we change the demography and the dynamics of the place completely. And whether that will lead to a better environment, better opportunities, and everybody's interest would be served, that's another issue.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. I think it was very interesting, and it also covered a lot of aspects. So we have a lot of thinking that we can, do, and it would be very interesting even for the publication, because then I think we'll have much more points that you were not able to put down here, but we would be having it in the publication, which will be good for references for a lot of people in the future. So I would just end by saying what Dr. Imran talked about when we talk about heritage management in a different way, where he said that it's about the guest, that, when the guest comes, you definitely have to, look at them, and you have to entertain them. You have to, do everything possible. But at the same time, they also need to respect the place, or they also have the limitations, and they have, so that's what basically heritage management is ultimately at the end of it, especially when we look at tourism. And so I'll end with that. And thank you so very much. And I'll hand over to, I think, Aditi for, Thank you so very much.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm grateful that I got the opportunity to end this day by giving a vote of thanks. Well, today was a highly engaging session on the theme of intangible cultural heritage as a driver for tourism in historic towns. I, on behalf of our organizing team, would like to extend heartily vote of thanks to our speakers, Dr. Sharif Shams Imon, Professor Pushpalata, Professor Sajid Kausar, Dr. Mona Lisa Mahajan, and Ishita Shah. I would also like to thank architect Niyati Jigyasu for moderating the session, and Shalini Das Gupta, Secretary, ICOMOS Executive Committee, for her opening address. I thank our partner institutes, Department of Architecture, Planning and Design, IIT BHU, Center of Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University, for extending their support. I extend special thanks to Sir Naveen Piplani, President, ICOMOS India, for his support. I thank ICOMOS Executive Council, Professor Arun Menon, National Scientific Committee's Counselor, Shalini Das Gupta, Secretary, ICOMOS, and Priyanka ma'am. I am extremely delighted to see such a supporting attitude of all attendees as well. Lastly, I thank the organizing team for today, Aditi Rai, Mona Lisa Bharadwaj, Zarna Surendra Shah, Anshika Jain, Kritika Mohan, Lipika Khanna, Sukrit Sen, Lakshmi, Nigar Sheikh, Sukanya Sharma, Priyanka Singh, and Varsha. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here and making this session a success. Thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you all in the next session. Thank you.
May I, before we leave, may I request everyone to probably smile for a small
Thank you for the invitation.
If I may request everyone to switch on videos if they may. Screenshot is the new group picture now. Still waiting. Is this it? Yeah, I'm guessing not too many people are willing to be on camera today. Camera stopped by the host. Okay, so I think host needs to, Mona Lisa, could you please give rights to people to switch on camera?
1 second, please.
I hope in the near future we are again, standing in on some kind of a steps with the background behind, which actually talks about the event and everybody is together and there's a photograph being taken. So
I have been.
Yes. So our host today, Mona Lisa, has enabled everyone. Congratulations, Sukrit, for. Well, this is something that I experience everywhere. I see so many such female participation in heritage conservation in general, which is great. Yeah. So can we have people switch on videos if?
I think Dr. Pushpalata is not on. Others are there. Yeah.
Oh, I am here.
But in the sense we can't see you on video. Yeah.
Okay. So everyone can smile. I'll take a small screenshot. Yes, I guess it is good. Perfect. It's done.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Yeah, and we'll keep in touch.
Yeah,
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Mon. Thank you, Professor Koster. Thank you, Ishita.
Thank
you, Niyati, and your entire team for organizing it well.
Thank you, ma'am, for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to the whole team. It was quite smooth. Thank you so much.
I think we'll again listen to that window with one day. It was very interesting. So yeah.
Yes, I wish I could have played the whole thing. It just kills to show only few minutes of it, but yeah.
No,
it's
we
not
are
too long
hoping that
actually, just 3 minutes.
No, that's true. But there are these different these aspects, which are very different in the way that it brings out a different curating, because you would not actually might not associate with tourism in a way if you just look at curating part.
Yeah.
So
in fact, we don't even associate with heritage, right? And with heritage and pristine and sanctity, what we expect on site is what we expect then in the exploration as well. In fact, the second slide where the stories are happening, that's also a video. It is supposed to be an AR/VR output actually.
Okay.
But as second clip, I will definitely go over 10